There's a specific kind of person, and if you've stumbled onto this video, there's a real chance it's you, someone who will drop everything to help a friend through a crisis at 1 a.m. and then lie awake afterward wondering why they still feel like they're not enough. They pour into other people like there's an endless supply of them, and then look in the mirror and feel not much good at all. I want to be careful with what I say next, because this is a topic where it's easy to overreach. Not every generous person is secretly in pain. Not every kind act is a mask for something darker. Most of the time, kindness is just kindness. But for a specific subset of people, and if you're watching this, you probably already suspect you're one of them, the giving, and the self-doubt aren't separate things happening to coincide in the same life. They're connected. Sometimes closely enough that you can't fully understand one without looking at the other. Let's talk about what that connection can look like, where it might come from, what it costs, and more importantly, what tends to help. There isn't one single cause of this pattern, and I want to resist the urge to hand you a tidy origin story, because tidy origin stories are usually wrong for at least half the people who hear them. But there is a developmental pathway that shows up often enough in clinical literature and in the accounts of people who recognize themselves in this that it's worth naming. For some people, this way of relating to others can trace back to childhood environments where love felt inconsistent, where affection seemed to come and go depending on behavior, mood, achievement, or simply whether the adults around them were having a good day. Not every child in that kind of environment grows up to be a chronic overgiver. Temperament matters. Other relationships matter. Whether there was even one steady adult in the picture matters. But for some, what that inconsistency can teach, quietly and without anyone meaning to teach it, is that love is something you earn. And one of the fastest ways to earn it is to become useful. To be the one who notices, who helps, who fixes. Over time, for people where this pattern takes hold, giving can stop feeling like a choice and start feeling almost automatic, less I want to help you, and more I'm not sure how to be in a relationship without serving some kind of function in it. From the outside, that looks like generosity. Admirable, even from the inside, it can feel like running. Not always, not for everyone, but often enough that if you're nodding along right now, it's worth sitting with. In clinical psychology, particularly in schema therapy, there's a concept called a negative self-schema, a deeply held belief structure in which a person experiences themselves as fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or less than. It's not a diagnosis. It's a pattern of thinking that shows up across a range of experiences, and plenty of people carry some version of it without it defining their whole life. Here's the part that surprises people. This kind of schema doesn't necessarily suppress warmth toward others. In a lot of cases, it seems to intensify it. If somewhere underneath, a person believes they aren't inherently worth good things, one of the only socially rewarded ways left to feel like they matter is to make other people's lives better. So they become the emotional infrastructure of everyone around them, the one who remembers the birthday, who checks in after the hard appointment, who notices when someone in the group chat has gone quiet. And they're often genuinely excellent at it. What can happen underneath that, for some people, is a kind of running tally. Each act of kindness gets logged half-consciously as evidence, see, I do have value. And when the kindness goes unnoticed or unreciprocated, the balance doesn't stay neutral, it tips back toward that familiar, uncomfortable place. There's real research on giving and well-being, and it's worth being precise about what it actually shows. A widely cited 2013 study by psychologist Laura Aknin and colleagues, published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, found that pro-social spending money on others rather than on yourself was associated with greater well-being across a wide range of countries and cultures, including some very different economic contexts. That's a real replicated finding. It's not about self-worth specifically. The study wasn't measuring people who give compulsively versus people who give freely, but it does establish something important. Giving to others is genuinely measurably good for the giver, on average. What that research doesn't settle is the question of motivation, and that's where this gets more complicated. Giving from a place of security can look identical from the outside to giving from a place of scarcity. Same action, very different internal experience. One is closer to an open hand. The other can feel closer to a transaction one you entered, hoping the other person wouldn't clock how much you needed it to land. If you've ever wondered why the people who seem hardest on themselves are often the ones everyone goes to for support, there may be a reason for that too. Someone who has spent years learning, consciously or not, that their own inner world doesn't get much airtime can become unusually attuned to other people's inner worlds. Reading a room, sensing a shift in someone's tone before they say anything, anticipating a need before it's spoken. Those are real skills. Call them emotional intelligence, because in a lot of ways that's exactly what they are. But for some people, those skills were built less out of curiosity about others and more out of necessity, a kind of early training in managing the emotional temperature of a room in order to feel safe in it. Both things can be true at once. The skill is real, admirable, useful, and it may have been forged in a context that wasn't particularly fair to the kid who had to learn it. This pattern rarely announces itself directly. It's not usually someone saying, "I hate myself" out loud. More often, it shows up in smaller, easier-to-miss ways. An inability to take a compliment without deflecting it, "Oh, it was nothing," even when it clearly wasn't. A strange discomfort when someone does something generous for them, like the gesture itself needs to be managed rather than received. A background hum of suspicion that if people really knew them, not the version who shows up, listens, and helps, but the person underneath that, they might not stick around. So the giving continues, partly because it feels good and genuinely is good, but partly, for some people, because staying useful feels like the only reliable way to stay wanted. Here's where it gets genuinely messy, and I don't think there's a clean way to resolve it. A lot of people living this pattern don't recognize it as self-doubt or self-criticism at all, because it doesn't feel like that from the inside. It feels like realism, like humility, like just knowing your place in a room. The internal story usually isn't "I don't value myself." It's closer to "I'm just not that special," or "I'm a little harder to love than most people, so I focus on other people instead," or "my own stuff isn't that interesting." And the culture around us tends to reinforce this without meaning to. We praise selflessness, we call it noble, we hand out "she'd give you the shirt off her back" as one of the highest compliments available. So the person quietly running from their own discomfort by pouring into everyone else keeps getting told they're good, they're generous, they're so giving, and that praise lands in a strange place. It's exactly what they need to hear, and also somehow completely beside the point, because it praises the output without ever touching what's underneath it. One question tends to cut through a lot of this, and it comes up consistently in attachment-focused and schema therapy work. When do you feel most deserving of love? Most people who wrestle with this pattern will answer something like, "when I've done something for someone," "when I've been useful," "when I've fixed a problem." Almost never. Just because I exist. Just because I showed up as myself, with nothing to offer that day. That gap matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. It's worth being specific about where this pattern actually shows up in a life, because self-worth issues can sound abstract until you see it in a Tuesday. In relationships, it can look like being the one who always initiates, always remembers, always adjusts, and then feeling a confusing mix of resentment and guilt when that isn't matched, because asking for reciprocity feels uncomfortably close to asking for proof that you're wanted. It can look like staying in the helper role in a friendship long after it's stopped being mutual, because stepping out of that role feels like it might mean stepping out of the relationship entirely. At work, It often looks like being the person who says yes to the extra project, the late meeting, the coworker's crisis, not always out of ambition, but because turning something down can trigger a disproportionate amount of anxiety. Boundaries get framed internally as risk. Saying I can't take this on right now can feel less like a normal, reasonable sentence and more like a small bet against your own worth. None of this makes someone weak or naive. Often the opposite, it takes a lot of internal management to keep functioning this well while carrying this much. But it's worth naming plainly, because a lot of people doing this have never had anyone describe it back to them in words. They've just lived inside it. If you want a rough way to check whether any of this applies to you, and I'd hold this loosely, not as a diagnostic tool, just to mirror some common threads people describe are feeling more comfortable giving help than asking for it, even when they clearly need it. A flash of guilt or panic when they say no to a request. Difficulty naming what they actually want when directly asked. Discomfort, not gratitude. Discomfort when someone does something kind for them. And a tendency to measure their worth in a day by how useful they were to someone else. You don't need to check every box for this to be relevant to you. And checking most of them doesn't mean something is broken in you. It means a pattern took root somewhere along the way, and patterns can be worked with. Picture a fairly ordinary version of this. Someone gets a text at 9 p.m. from a friend who's spiraling about something at work. They were about to get ready for bed. They stay up for 2 hours instead, talking them through it, validating every worry, sending follow-up messages the next morning to check in. That same week, they mention to that same friend, almost in passing, that they've been struggling with something themselves, and when the conversation doesn't circle back to it, they don't say anything. They just quietly note it, file it away, and tell themselves it's fine, that they probably brought it up wrong, that it wasn't that important anyway. Nobody in that exchange did anything cruel. The friend wasn't being selfish on purpose, but the asymmetry is the whole pattern in miniature showing up fully for someone else's need, and in the same breath, deciding your own doesn't quite count. That's often what makes this so hard to catch in real time. There's no single dramatic moment to point to. It's the accumulation of 100 small moments like that one, each individually reasonable, each easy to explain away. That eventually adds up to a person who can tell you everything about everyone they love and very little about what they, themselves, actually need on a given day. It's also worth saying something about the voice that runs underneath all of this, because most people who recognize themselves in this video have heard it so often they've stopped noticing it's there. It tends to sound less like outright cruelty and more like flat, matter-of-fact narration. Don't make this about you, they have enough going on, you're fine, focus on them. Reasonable sounding sentences. That's what makes the voice so effective. It rarely announces itself as an inner critic. It just sounds like being considerate. One small, concrete shift some people find useful isn't trying to silence that voice outright that tends to backfire, but adding a second sentence after it. Not replacing "they have enough going on" with "actually I matter more," which can feel like a lie the first 100 times you try to believe it. Just adding something smaller and more honest next to it, "they have enough going on." And I'm also allowed to say "I'm having a hard week." Both sentences get to be true at the same time. Nobody has to lose for the other person to be cared for. That's a small linguistic move, but for a lot of people, it's the first crack in a pattern that's otherwise felt seamless and automatic for years. I want to be direct about something, because it would be easy to walk away from a video like this with the wrong takeaway: kind, generous people are not secretly damaged. Warmth that comes from a wounded place and warmth that comes from a genuinely secure place are not always distinguishable, and they're often not mutually exclusive. A person can give from both at once. The care is real. The love is real. None of what we've talked about cheapens that. What's also real is that the same quality of care extended so freely to everyone else is something a person is allowed to turn toward themselves, not as a project to complete or a debt to pay off, but simply because they're a person too, and people don't have to earn basic regard for themselves any more than the people they take care of do. Recovery from this pattern, if that's the right word for it, doesn't tend to look like a single moment of realization followed by smooth sailing. Most people who've worked through it describe something closer to a long, ongoing argument with an old, familiar voice, one that slowly, unevenly starts losing a bit of ground over time. A few things that consistently show up in that process, whether through therapy, through slower self-reflection, or just through living long enough to notice the pattern clearly. Learning to sit in the discomfort of receiving something without immediately trying to balance the ledger. Practicing saying no in low-stakes situations first, before attempting it in the relationships where it matters most. Getting curious, without judgment, about what you actually want, not what's useful, not what keeps the peace, just what you want, even if the honest answer at first is, I don't know. None of that is a quick fix, and I'm not going to pretend it is. But if any part of this video felt uncomfortably specific rather than just vaguely relatable, that specificity is worth paying attention to. Most people spend years living inside a pattern like this without ever getting the chance to see its shape from the outside. Being able to recognize it even partially, even uncomfortably, tends to be where things start to shift. You don't have to earn your place in your own life. You're already in it. If any of this hit close to home, there's a bundle linked below that a lot of you have found useful for turning it into daily action sleep, focus, and mental clutter. One small step at a time. Links in the description and pinned comment.